FPV. I've had the Meteor65 Pro for over 2 months now. I wanted to spend a little more time with this because it does have one major difference from the non-pro version, and that is the prop size. Normal whoops have a 31 millimeter prop size and frame. They've increased the prop size to 35 millimeter. Now that doesn't sound like that's a significant amount, but if you calculate the disc area of the prop, that's a 27% increase in area. So what does that mean? It means that the disc loading and thrust to weight ratio is improved on this. So it's going to fly, in acro mode. You should be able to do acro slightly better because you're not going to be bottoming out on power loops. And so let's see if that's really the case. But before we do that, let's go through the specs. As already stated, the frame supports 35 millimeter props and motor post to motor post at 65 millimeters. The flight controller is an all-in-one F4 1S that has 5 amp ESCs, and what I really like about it, it does support ELRS. The camera is an analog camera, of course. It's the BetaFPV CO2 micro camera. The canopy is their upgraded tougher canopy, but it is a fixed angle of about 20 degrees. So it's a little steeper for a little faster flying, and so if you're a beginner, it might be a little steep. The battery connector is the BetaFPV BT 2.0 connector. The battery that it comes with is the 300 milliamp hour battery from BetaFPV, and again it has the BT 2.0 connector, so you're going to get less of a voltage drop as compared to the PH 2.0 connector. The motors have been upgraded. They're the A02 SE motors. They are 19,500 kV motors. As far as the weight, I did weigh it, and it does match up with the spec of 22 grams. And with the 300 milliamp hour battery, it comes in at 31 grams. The VTX is power switchable from 25 milliwatts up to 350 milliwatts. They claim a flight time of 4 minutes. The way I fly, with a mix of acro and tooling around type flying or faster angle mode flying, I was getting more about 3.5 minutes, but I'm usually pretty conservative with my batteries. So when I measured the voltage after I landed, it would come back up to about 3.7 volts. This is what you get in the kit. You get this nice little carrying case. I always appreciate these because they're real convenient to throw your whoop in a backpack. Makes it real easy. You get a 300 milliamp hour 1S battery with a BP 2.0 connector. You get some spare props. You get a QR code for the user manual. You get a screwdriver. You get a USB cable for making configuration changes in Betaflight Configurator. You get also a nice little charger with the BP 2.0 connector, and then you get the quad itself. So pretty complete kit. So before we get started, I wanted to state a few things. I always hesitate doing tuning videos because if you're a new pilot, you can quickly go down a rabbit hole. If you're a new pilot, I would not recommend you going through this procedure until you get more comfortable running Betaflight Configurator and making changes. But if you are, if you're an intermediate or more of an expert as far as how to configure Betaflight, then this tutorial is fine. But with that, let's go ahead. The first thing that you're going to need to do is I'm running the latest 10.8 Betaflight Configurator because there's a lot of enhancements with that. I also upgraded to 4.3 release candidate 3 because there are some features in that, particularly Express LRS improvements, plus there's the dynamic notch filter improvements. But I would suggest that you start by going to the presets tab and always do a backup. They made it super easy with the 10.8 configurator. You just do save backup and it's going to go ahead and write that off to disk. So always do that so you can always go back to your original settings. Nothing changed in the ports tab. As far as configuration, I am running 8K 4K. If you're going to want to use RPM filtering, with Express LRS and RPM filtering run at the same time, it puts a heavy load on the CPU. Even as it is with RPM filtering turned off, just the average load down at the bottom here is 38%. So if you're going to use RPM filtering versus the dynamic notch filter without RPM filtering, you're going to want to run this 8K 2K just as a point of reference. Also, on Patrick C. Clark's latest Project Mockingbird tune, he's using the radio to mix in roll with yaw. In older versions, which I like better, he actually does that by adding some camera angle, and my camera angle is approximately 20 degrees. So what this means is when you do a yaw movement, it adds a little bit of roll, and I like that. His latest tune has that also on acro when you're in acro mode, and I don't like that. It really messes me up because I automatically know how to do that manually. So I only have this turned on for angle, and we'll get into the modes here quickly. So moving on to power and battery, I did lower these values. The minimum cell voltage I lowered down to 3.1. The maximum cell voltage actually increased to 4.4 because I'm charging to high volts on my battery. The warning cell, I dropped that down to 3.2. The other thing I had to do, I don't know if it's just my particular flight controller, the voltage scaling was off. This was set to like 116 and it was reading too high a voltage. So I dropped this down to 110. And that, you'll have to see whether or not your voltage is reading high or not and calibrate the voltage is what I'm basically telling you. It might be okay on yours, mine it wasn't. So I actually lowered the scale down to 110. The next thing is, I forgot to also mention on the configuration tab, I did set up an auxiliary channel for loss model. It's where you're using D-Shot to buzz the motor so you can find your model. Although it's small motors, you can't hear it that well, but at least it's something. I didn't do anything with failsafe. PID tuning. Basically what I did, I used UAV Tech's filter settings. I just did what he suggested, and I do not have RPM filtering on. I'm relying totally on dynamic notch filtering, which is significantly again improved in Betaflight 4.3. All right, as far as the PID settings, this is really coming from the Project Mockingbird mixed in with some of UAV Tech's. So the reason why I'm mentioning this is kind of using UAV Tech's and Project Mockingbird's suggestions, and then I modified them from there to my liking. For example, Patrick likes a higher strength. As far as when you're in angle mode, UAV Tech has this lower. I set mine to 80. Kind of a compromise between the two, but if you don't like the stiffness of, because for example when you're pushing the stick forward to move forward, you really have to hold it forward. If you let off the stick, it just self-levels very quickly, and so if you don't like that stiffness, you probably want to change the angle strength and lower that. Moving on to the modes. Right here, I talked about the FPV angle mix, and you can see that when I'm in angle mode, it has the mix in here. This is more like his older tune that he had. I just like that better. So again, you can just, I'm going to cut and paste my CLI, and these are how the modes are set up. This changes your rate profile based off of what mode you're in. So then moving on to the video transmitter, I didn't make any changes there. I thought Betaflight did a good job here of setting up the video transmitter. In fact, they even had low power on with disarm, which basically sets it to 25 milliwatts. I'm normally running 350 milliwatts, but with this on, when you're disarmed, it's 25 milliwatts. So, and then the OSD, I mean, that's a personal preference. I change things around. This is the way I like it. So another thing I wanted to point out that is critical, I'm running props out. The quad is shipped with props in. So keep that in mind if you use my CLI dump. If you want to use props in and you don't want to change the motor direction, you're going to need to go into the Betaflight configurator after you use my CLI dump and change this to non-reverse. What's nice about Betaflight configurator 10.8, it automatically communicates to the ESC, so that you don't have to bring up the BL Halley configurator and change the direction there. It does it all through Betaflight in the flight controller, which is a great improvement. So again, I'm running props out, and so if you use my CLI dump, you need to either reverse your props, or if you want to go props in, you're going to have to change the setting. So the other thing I just wanted to point out, you can see I have bidirectional D-shot turned off. So next I'm going to go ahead and show you a short video of an acro flight and a angle mode flight. So let's wrap this review up of the BetaFPV Meteor65 Pro. The pros: the frame really holds up well in crashes. I didn't have any struts break, and I had some pretty hard crashes with this thing because I was pushing it in power loops and trying to get a feel for it. The other thing that's outstanding about this is the flight performance. With a good tune on it, it is great for acro and outdoor flying for a whoop if you're like that. Also in angle mode, if you have a larger area that you're flying, a faster track, I don't race, but it is a fast quad when you put a good tune on it. I like that it has the ELRS receiver on it that gives you more range than you'll ever need. Also, the VTX at 350 milliwatts, that's really great for a whoop, and that also gives you longer range than what you will typically need in indoor flying and backyard flying, so I really like that as well. Then also the flight time. is great. If you baby it, yes, you can get 4 minutes of flight time. Yeah, I do think it's a good value. It's $119.99 US. You might be able to get it cheaper. That's what it is going for, like at Race Day Quads or BetaFPV. But given that you get this case, you get a battery, you get a charger, USB cable, screwdriver, spare props. It's a pretty complete kit, so I do think it's a good value. So now let's go through the cons. The first, I like the 35 millimeter props. I hope it becomes more of a standard, but now it's not. And so I don't race, but I'm not sure that they would allow you to compete against 31 millimeter prop size whoops. I'm not sure what the rules would be on that, but so that might be a con, although it isn't for me. The next is the camera angle isn't adjustable, and I like the camera angle. I think the way I fly, it's great, but if you're a new pilot, I think that's going to be a little more problematic for you, because you're going to be looking up at the sky too much, and I think it would have been better, I think, for beginners if they would have gone with a little flatter camera angle. Also, the camera itself has horrible low light capabilities. I found that if you're indoors and don't have good lighting, it's very, very grainy and almost unflyable. So that's a big concern for me. If you were like in whoop racing in a bar or something that had low lights and just LED gates as lighting, I think that would be a problem, because it was a problem for me if I didn't have adequate lighting. It was just very grainy. Also outside the camera, and you can see that from the video that I showed, occasionally you'll get this flash white out, and that's like the white balance is all messed up on the camera. Maybe I have a defective camera, don't know, but that definitely is a con on this. The next con, the tune out of the box is not great. Did have to spend quite a bit of time tuning this. Now the next thing, I'm going to mention it. I had one sticky motor, but it seemed to loosen up. I don't know if the bearings just were a little stiff, or I guess they're bushings. Were a little stiff on this, and so there's one motor that was a little sticky, but then it freed up and now it's running fine. The other, it's not really a con because a lot of the other whoops are only 5 amp ESCs, but the newbie drone Acro B is like 12 amp ESCs, and I thought it would have been better if they had like 7 to 10 amp at least. 5 amps just is a little light in my mind. And then the last is the VTX antenna placement, but that's just what you get with this type of a canopy. It's sticking out, and it can get the signal can get impacted significantly depending on your orientation of the quad, and that's more at 25 milliwatts, like if you're racing. But at 350 milliwatts, it wasn't a problem. So I just wanted to mention that if you're running at 25 milliwatts, that it becomes more of a problem with this antenna orientation, but it's not if you're running at 350 milliwatts. So my conclusion on this, would I recommend it? And this is a tough one. I mean, I'm not going to give it, thumbs up specifically for a new pilot, because you have to spend a lot of time tuning it. I mean, again, will paste my CLI dump, but you're still going to have to spend some time upgrading and flashing new firmware. And then also I updated the ESCs to Bluebird. So that's not something I would recommend for a new pilot, because it's, you potentially would get frustrated. But for somebody like me, I really like the 35 millimeter props, and I think I'm going to switch out the camera just because I just think this is not a good camera. And so, do I have buyer's remorse? No. I think it's an interesting quad. I like that it has EORS, and the positive pros outweigh the cons for me, but I'm a more experienced pilot. So with that, I greatly appreciate you watching my channel.